Okay, so just now that it's being recorded, just as a brief introduction, this is the first of four classes on the Four Great Vows, and studying the Four Great Vows using the original Chinese characters. At the beginning of each class, we're going to take refuge and pay homage to the three jewels together, and so that's what we're going to do right now.
지심기명예 성공가 천하정사 일체미진수 제대 선지식 지심기명예 시방삼세 제망차해 상주 일체 승가야 요즘 유원무진삼보 대자대비 수화정예명혼가피력 원경법계제중생 자타 일시 성불도.
Okay, so everybody can hear me good, right? Sound good?
I can now, but I could not hear any of the chanting.
Oh, could you hear the chanting, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Could you hear the chanting, Elizabeth? Okay. All right. Sorry about that, Joe.
No, I don't.
It's
Yeah.
the chanting sounded really good. I'm sorry you missed it.
Oh, me too. That's one of my favorite chants too. So
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So maybe we can try to figure out what happened there. But there are a few of us here together in this Zoom meeting. I originally had planned to live stream the class, but the live streaming somehow between Zoom and YouTube, at least I wasn't able to get it to work. So I'm going to work on that between now and the next class. But the class is being recorded. And so in addition to the people here on the Zoom, anyone else who comes along and sees this on YouTube, welcome. This is the first of 4 classes on, as you can see up on the slide here, Four Great Vows. This is lesson number 1. And as you can see from the strange shapes that appear on the screen that's being shared, everyone can see the screen, right?
Yes.
This is a class not just on the Four Great Vows, but on the original form of the Four Great Vows, written in traditional Chinese characters. And I don't want to. I want to kind of dive right in, but just a very little bit of background. This was written down by a guy named Ji Yi. We'll talk maybe a little about him later on. But this was approximately 1,500 years ago in China. And he didn't just invent the Four Great Vows out of nowhere, but he was the one who gave them the formulation that's been handed down and that people still use today. And all of the, Westerners often recite the Four Great Vows in some translation in their native language. And for example, in English, there are literally dozens of different translations of the Four Great Vows, but they're all translations of the same thing. And that's what we're going to be looking at, what the original form of the Four Great Vows is. So over here on this side of the screen is the entire Four Great Vows, including the title. And the title, which is just 4 characters long, is actually what we're going to be covering in this first class. And just to kind of very, very quickly, of course, we'll go over all this. Each class will occur on the first Saturday of the month, starting in November. This is the first Saturday in November. So over the course of 4 months, we're going to cover this entire thing. There's actually 21 different characters here. Many of the characters are repeated, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But in addition to the 21 characters in the Four Great Vows, most, I can only see one exception. No, there's two, but except for two of the characters, all of them can be taken apart into components. And very often the components are themselves characters. So in each class, we're going to take one part of the Four Great Vows. We're going to take the characters in that part of the Four Great Vows and take them apart, learn the characters themselves and also the components, and then there'll be homework for each class. And this is basically the homework for the first class is to learn these 20 characters right here that I just highlighted on the left side of the screen, to learn what they mean, to recognize them, and how to write them. And then while we're doing that, we're also going to be, like I said, taking the characters apart and looking at the components and seeing how the components are put together. So the goals are to learn to recognize the characters and what they mean, learn how to write the characters one stroke at a time. Every character in Chinese is made up of different strokes. We'll look at that, the different kinds of strokes, and then learn how the characters are interrelated, interconnected. You take one character that has different components, take it apart. You take a whole bunch of characters that have different components, then you have these components that are lying around. You can put them back together in different ways. It's like, almost like Lego. But so that's the big picture. And then another approach to the big picture is just to look at the four vows themselves, right over here on the right side of the screen. And I'm slightly dyslexic. I may at some time during the classes say left when it should be right. And also, sometimes Zoom will helpfully invert things, but I think this is everybody, the part of the screen that I'm highlighting is the right side of the screen for everyone, right? Correct? Yeah, okay, good. All right. So what I just highlighted here is the entirety of the Four Great Vows. The first line here is actually the title. And should I make it bigger? Yeah, anyway, so the title is literally four. This character here means four. This character here means great. And these two characters together mean vow. And so that's the so that's lesson number one. But we'll go over this. And so one of the things that we have to do together in these classes is to push this a little bit over here like this. I'm trying to make it so that everything looks the way I want it to look. And please, if at any point during the class something doesn't look right or isn't working right, you can unmute yourselves. I think I muted everybody because sometimes there's background noise or whatever. But if something isn't working right, please speak up. Let me know. Oh yeah. So these four characters here, we're going to turn them into these 20 characters over here. And so I'm going to kind of slowly go through. Junk off the screen. I'm going to slowly go through these four characters and show you how we get from 4 characters to 20 characters. And one thing just to let you know, these 2 characters right here we're actually are not included in the homework for the first class. What we're going to do is that we're going to look at the components because these are fairly complicated characters, these 2 here. We're going to look at the components, and I want you to practice writing and learning to recognize those components before the next class. And then in the next class, those two characters will become part of the homework for the second class. So I want to do this as gradually and incrementally as possible, to make it more manageable. But since it's a fairly small group, if anybody has a question or comment at this point, that would be appropriate. Mark, yeah.
Well, the 7th and 8th characters in the first line of 1.1 make the first vow, and then the 4th and 5th in the second line of 1.1 make the 4th character in the Four Great Vows, I think. So they are, it looks like to me.
Yeah, so when we look
So
at the
they are,
components,
you said they weren't included, but they're on those two lines if you stick them together.
if you stick them back together, right. So what we're
Right.
going to do is we're going to look at the components individually and then also look at them in combination. Yeah. Joe, you wanted to say or ask something?
Yeah, two questions.
Mhm.
Because on the image on the right, we're reading this from left to right.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Could these be reversed and written the opposite way, reading
Yeah.
from right
It-
to left?
Yeah. So almost certainly, Ji wrote them going down, and
Okay.
and right to left.
Right.
That's the way they did it 1,500 years ago in China. So and so there will be many points in the course of these classes where anybody who's a real stickler for things, we haven't even gotten to my pronunciation of Chinese yet. That's going to be another source of tremendous embarrassment for me. But that does raise a very important point. I want to remove as many barriers as possible for people to be able to make this accessible to people. Having the characters go up and down and right to left, it blows my mind. I can kind of work my way through it, but it makes it much more difficult. It makes it much more difficult to just to get it to line up. Actually, Word has functionality in it where you can do that. And then all of a sudden it's like, I mean, you're in a different universe where the letters go down as you're typing them and it go across right to left. And it's kind of bizarre, and it's kind of cool. And that is how it was originally. But even though it's not written in the exact arrangement, these are the characters that Ji used.
Great.
And you had another question, Joe?
Yes, another
Yeah.
question just about where we're already sort of looking at, well, these characters can be broken down to be this or these other characters, or there's a word, it's eluding me now, but
Yeah.
and then put back together,
Yes.
and also we're seeing things on different lines.
Uh-huh.
Is that just the manner of Chinese writing, or
Mhm.
is there perhaps some sort of coding
Yeah.
or mathematics or puzzle element
Mhm.
brought into this because it is the Four Great Vows?
Yeah.
Or is that widespread in Chinese?
So, if once you start looking at, so first of all, this is kind of a poem, and this is a very standard poetic
Mm,
format of 7 characters.
mm,
Poems that are composed of lines that each have 7 characters, and so it once you start looking at things like this, or if you look at the Sandokai or other relatively short teachings that are written in a poetic format in Chinese characters, you can start to see patterns. And then you start to, and you can start to figure them out. There's, if you really want to blow your mind, there's a great poem written by a Chinese master named Uisang, where he arranged he arranged the characters neither up and down nor across, but in spirals. And then the characters will spiral around and then go across and make another spiral and spiral, and it's four spirals of characters. And so it's not clear what he was up to. It looks really cool if you watch the characters being traced out while that poem is being chanted. But I don't know what it means, and I don't know. Sometimes there are intentional. Sometimes I think people would do things to have like a visual rhyming, visual repetition, and sometimes that can be done just for effect, or it could have some very deep meaning. I don't know.
Just to add, because these are 4 lines, is this considered a gatha?
Yeah. So I don't know.
Okay.
I think you could probably consider it a gatha.
Or even an incantation.
Or even so these 4 lines are part of the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra chant right at the very end. And so that is one thing that we'll talk about, is how a Korean Buddhist would chant this. I probably won't talk about that until the next class, but that's this is something you could chant. It is not only, this is something that one does chant. Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
All right. So now let's Elizabeth, do you want to jump in with anything? Okay. All right. So now, speaking of jumping in, the very first character. So it's the very first character of the Four Great Vows in the title is just how to write the number 4 in classical Chinese, and this is also modern Chinese. A lot of the characters that we're going to be covering are the same characters. In fact, a large number of the characters that'll be covered in this class are just characters that any 6-year-old in China knows how to write if they go to school. So we're not doing anything that's really all that mind-boggling. Although Chinese people complain about how difficult it is to write Chinese characters, just as English-speaking people complain about how difficult it is to spell English. And I'm not convinced. I mean, it's probably a little bit harder to learn Chinese characters, but English spelling is quite complicated. And actually, I have a friend who's Korean, who has a great deal of trouble. I'm also trying to learn a little bit of Hangul, which is the Korean writing system, and I told her that, and she told me how much trouble she has spelling in Korean and Hangul. And Hangul is much simpler than Chinese characters, and it's also much more logical than English spelling. But it's always hard. The writing is hard. And so let me just say from the start that in this class, we're going to be training our eyes to see, to look at and recognize these characters. And we're going to be training our hands to write the characters. So in the process of doing that, we're going to be doing a lot. You have to do a lot of thinking. You have to look at and try to remember. But in the end, with practice, the thinking isn't going to be that important. The thinking only helps us. This is really a body practice that involves the hands and the eyes. And so if you really, so anybody can participate in this course to whatever level they want. But if you do the homework and learn the lessons as they're laid out, then you will then just be able to sit down and write. That's really the goal, to sit down and write the Four Great Vows without thinking, because your hands and your eyes now know what to do. All right. So the first character is a very nice example of one of the ways in which simple Chinese characters can be combined to make, in this case, slightly more complicated Chinese characters. You take one character and put it inside another character. So this has the character for circle, which is this right here. And inside of it, you place the character for child. And so I mentioned that my pronunciation of Chinese is very bad. So these, whenever we come across a character, I'll always provide you with what's called the pinyin, which is what's right here. This pinyin is a way of, so this would be something like, if you really try to pronounce it the way a Mandarin speaker pronounces it, it would sound something like shi. But to an English speaker who doesn't know Mandarin, like me, I'm trying to learn it a little bit, it looks like C, or you might know that the S's in Chinese are usually pronounced sh, so it's a she. But that's not how it sounds when a Chinese person who knows how to pronounce these things actually says it. But if you want to remember the pinyin, which you should, the main point is to learn, oops, sat on the mouse a little bit. Main point is to learn how to write the characters, learn what they mean. Along the way, you want to start to become familiar with the way in which the sound of the characters is written out. And if you really want to get ambitious, there's lots of YouTube videos and classes you can sign up for to learn how to speak Chinese, which I cannot do, right? So, and if you want to learn how to speak Chinese, you really need to study with people who are native speakers, which obviously I'm not. So, she is how this is pronounced, more or less, means four, and it's made up of two characters. One is pronounced more or less wei, and that is just a square, and which means circle or surrounding. And then this is er, which means child. It can also mean mortar, not like a weapon mortar, but mortar like the stuff that holds bricks together. And if you take this character here and put it inside of this character, then you get this character. And there's actually lots of examples of this in Chinese. Here's 3 more examples. If you take this cross character, which is the character for the number 10, and put it inside the circle character, you get a character that means field. This is the character for field. If you take a single line, which is the character for the number 1, and put it inside the character for square. And these are all characters, these are part of what we're going to learn in the course of, not in this lesson, but these are characters that we will encounter again. Take a single line, put it inside of the square, which means circle. This is the character for sun. And if you take an X, put it inside of the square, and put a little, now, so obviously this this slash here, this is a character that means slash. Sometimes this character, the one that I've highlighted down here, is rarely encountered on its own, but it's very often encountered as a part of another character where it when it's combined, it just becomes this little dot, little check at the top. And this is a character that is not very common in Chinese, but it means the soft part of a baby's head, which is also called the fontanelle. But I only point that out because what we're doing here with this very first character in the Four Great Vows is very common. So let's at least get through the next slide. I want to, at 3:35, we should have a break for 5 minutes. I think it's important to take breaks so that people don't get too, I don't know, velocitized. But this character, in addition to putting one character inside of another, this is the second character in the Four Great Vows, and this is a character that means great. This is a character, this kind of squiggly bent character here means bow as in a weapon, like a bow, like a bow and arrow. So Hong, which means great, is made up of Gong, which means bow, and another character that kind of sounds like she. Remember, we had another character with she. So in which is like almost like a triangle. Open. It's an open triangle. When the sound of characters are written in pinyin, in addition to the regular English characters that we recognize, which are ultimately derived from Latin. So sometimes this is called, it's usually referred to as romanization. So when you take Chinese or Korean or Japanese or some non-Western language and try to write it out using letters that we recognize, it's called romanization. And when you romanize Chinese, you have to take account of the fact that for whatever reason, Chinese has tones. Every syllable in Chinese has a tone. And this character has a tone represented by just a flat line over it. And I'm really not going to talk about tones. Tones is one of the reasons why I cannot speak Mandarin. So I haven't learned how to make those tones yet. But anyway, so this is another example of another way that characters are put together. And once again, these examples down here are all other characters, components and characters that we will cover in this class. This is the character for Dharma. And it's made up of two characters. This is now I think the word that Joe was looking for earlier was radical. Is that the word you were looking for earlier, Joe? Yeah. So some of these components are called radicals. Not all of them are called radicals. Usually a radical is a special form of a character that's smaller and more compact and is put either on the side or on top or underneath other characters to make up. If you study Chinese, if you take a real Chinese class at a university or a high school or wherever, you will kind of learn the difference between radicals and just any old component. Every little part of a character isn't necessarily a radical. But if you really study Chinese, you'll find out that there is an agreement among Chinese experts on what's a radical and what's a component, and which it's a little bit of a black art. But anyway, these are two components that together make up the character for Dharma, and we will cover both of these components later on. These are two components. This is the character for Buddha, and these are the components of the character for Buddha. And this is the component for only or just. In the one of the poems that's associated with the ox herding pictures. I think it's I can't remember which poem, but there's a line in it where it says, "Only listen." And this is the only in only listen. And it's made up of two components. Anyway, so I'm going to stop now. We'll take a 5-minute break, come back at 3:40 or 3:41 maybe, and then continue on. We're going to cover all 20 of these characters today, but I think we've got a good start.
Kurt, if I may. I might try to open this meeting out on my computer, just so it's a lot bigger, and I can see it better than on the phone. Okay.
Oh, okay, okay, Joe. Are you watching it on your phone?
Yeah, but I'm going to switch to the computer.
Okay, okay, that would be good. That probably
It'll
would
be
be
so
very
much bigger.
helpful.
So
I
I'll
think,
leave for a minute. I'll be back.
Yeah.
Hi. Let's see. Joe is coming back. I hope I let him in. Anyway, we will very just quickly. This is a short chant. Start the second session with the Heart Sutra. Here comes Joe. I think. Let's see if he got in this time.
마하반야 바라밀타 신변과한 자재보상 행신반야 바라밀타 시조견원 개론도 일체고에 사리자색 불이건건불이색 색즉시건건즉시색 수상행시 역부역시 사리자 시제법 공상 물생보며 불구부정부정불감시고 공중무색 무수상행식 무한히 비설신이 무색성향 미촉법 무한계 내지 무의식계 무무명령 무무명질 내지 무노사용 무소사질 무고증멸조 무지영 무득 이무소득고 보리살타이 반야바라밀타고 신무가에 무가에고 무유건보 홀리전도 몽상구경열반 삼세제 불리 반야바라밀타고 두간욕타라 삼약 삼보리고 지반야 바라밀타 시대신주 시대명주 시무상주 시무등등주능제유 최고진실부라 고설반야 바라밀타 주즉설주와 아제아제 바라 아제 바라 승아제 모지사바하 아제 아제 바라 아제 바라 승아제 모지사바하 아제 아제 바라 아제 바라 승아제 모지사바하 마하반야 바람타 신경
Okay. So far we've covered 6 characters. Were you able to hear the chanting that time, Joe? Okay, good. So far we've covered 6 characters. By looking at the first 2 characters and seeing that each of those 2 characters was made up of 2 other characters. And it turns out that the next 2 characters are also each made up of 2 characters. So this is going to give us a total of 10 just by taking the first line apart. Let me take that back. This character is actually made up of, this is 2 and this is 2. That's right. Yes. So it starts to get a little bit more complicated. If it's not complicated enough for you right now, don't worry. It's about to get a little more complicated. So this is the third character, which is she, another she. We've had 3 she so far. Each has a different tone. And it's made up of two characters, one of which is je, and the other is yan. And je and yan. And those two characters are on top of each other. Do you see that? That the this character has these two characters placed on top of one another. So that's different. The first case was one where one character was inside the other. The second was a case where the two characters are side by side. And this is a case where the two characters are placed on top of each other. Okay? And that's also a very common way of making characters. And this is three more examples that we will cover in this class. I'll just point out the one, this is the character for emptiness, gong. And it's made up of these two characters, one of which means a pit or a grave, and the other one means work, whatever that, I don't, isn't any necessarily, there isn't always significance to the meaning of the components in a character. And so sometimes the components are, well, there's a lot of different ways to look at the way that these components work. If you wanted to make it, if it's not already complicated enough, all right? So this is the second, this is the third character, and this is the third way that we've seen of putting the characters together. You can put one character inside another, you can put two characters side by side, or you can put two characters on top of each other. The next character in the title, so remember this character by itself means vow. And actually I believe that if you were to, you can take these characters, if you copy it and go, we can't do it from here, but if you search Google, one of the things that you'll see is a picture of two people getting married. So this is a word from, it's either this kid, yeah. Anyway, so the next character, and now this is just another example of two characters being placed side by side. All right, and this is another character that can mean desire or wish or pledge, and it's made up. It's pronounced something like yuan, and one of its components is also pronounced something like yuan. And the other component is pronounced something like the name of a infamous rapper. Ye. This is another example of a character that's composed of two components placed side by side, and each of those components are themselves characters. So let's see where we're at now. If you take the first character and the second character, that's 6 altogether, the character itself and the two components. Then as I said, for the second two characters, because the characters themselves are fairly complicated, and one of the main ways of telling how complicated a letter or a character is in Chinese is how many strokes does it have. And the second two characters, the second two, the third and the fourth, just have a lot of strokes in them. And so for learning the characters, I want to kind of avoid overdoing it at first. So we're just going to look at, for the first class, we're just going to look at these two components. And that's what I want you to practice for the homework, if you do the homework, and learn how to write these components. And then once you learn how to write the components, then you know the character itself that is made from the components, you can much more easily write it because you know all of the strokes. Your hand already knows where to go. You just have to kind of squish them together. Well, I'll talk in a minute about how when components, when separate characters are combined to make up a new character, that new character still takes up the same space. So it's squishing is not a technical term in Chinese linguistics, but it's basically what happens is that the components get mushed together. So anyway, so these are 10 characters, 10 of the 20 that we want to include as part of this first course. So that means we've got 10 more. And the 10 more come from taking these two and taking them apart because they also are made up of components. All right. So this is the characters written the way this is the title written the way Ji Yi would have written it, as Joe kind of alluded to earlier. And then I'm expanding the characters out here. And now let's look at the two components of the third character. All right, this is the third character over here on the right. We're looking at the two components of that character, and then we're going to take them apart. So this is the first component, and it's made up of two parts. And here are the two parts. J, which means break, is the component itself. The two parts are shou, which means hand, and jin, which means axe. And this first component is actually a radical, and it's the radical for hand. And so this is the character that means hand, which is also pronounced something like show or shao, I don't know. But when it's turned into a radical, it gets squished up, and also one of the strokes gets removed. So if you compare the way these two characters look, you can see that the radical form is compressed, and it's also missing the top part. There's an extra, if you go through and count the strokes. And the rest of it looks kind of the same. Also, the second, the lower stroke is angled now. And now if we move to the second component, which by itself is a fairly common Chinese word that means speech or words, pronounced yan, something like yan. It's made up of three components. One is the first component here is not commonly found as a standalone character. It's usually only found as a subcomponent of other characters. And but it does have a pronunciation, something like Tao. And it means what it kind of looks like. It looks like a lid, and that's what it is. And it's usually on top of a character. So it looks like a lid, and it usually looks like a lid on top of the rest of the character, which is exactly what it looks like in this case. If you look at the character for Yan. The next character is Er, which is two, and in Chinese, two is just two lines. We looked at one earlier, which is pronounced something like yi. It's just one line. And now, this character here and this character up here are not the same. They look the same, but they're not the same. One is actually slightly bigger than the other. And one of the main ways that the character for ko, which means mouth, is different from the character for wei, which means circle, is that you never put anything inside of, for whatever reason, when you're making characters, when you're constructing characters in Chinese, think if you have a square looking character and has something inside of it, that's the character for wei. The character for ko is a very common character for mouth, is a very common component found in lots and lots of characters. But you don't put anything inside of it. You put things on top of it, you put things below it, you put things on either side of it. But if you see a square looking character with something inside of it, that component is the component wei for circle. And then, of course, what's the only thing left to do is to take the two components of the fourth character and take that apart. Take them each apart. And, unfortunately, there's no way to make this less complicated. Sometimes you have to take a step back and realize we're only trying to learn 20 characters. And in terms of the pacing of this class, you've got a month to learn these 20 characters. I'm going over all of them right now in this, and 2 hours is already a long time to listen to somebody yakking about Chinese or anything. But it's a lot, but it's completely doable with some time and effort, okay? And so this component, this is the fourth character, which means yuan, and it's made up of two characters, one of which is also yuan, but this yuan means source in Chinese, and the second one is ye, and that means page or a sheet of paper. And then it's usually the case almost any character that has more than 3 or 4 or 5 strokes in it can be taken apart into components. And so this first component that has 3 subcomponents. One is one of my favorite components. It's a personal favorite. So when Han or Cliff is combined with other characters, it often not only comes in at the side, but it kind of goes over the character that's next to it. And it looks like what it is. It looks like a cliff. The next character, Bai, here, is a pretty common character. It means white. Actually has a lot of meanings. For historical reasons, it can mean someone who's reactionary or anti-communist. And it's it's very common. You'll see it a lot, unless you give up in despair and never look at Chinese again. You'll see Bai a lot, okay? And this is Xiao, pronounced something like Xiao, and it's just a character that means small. Turns out that Bai can be broken down even further. And at a certain point, you just have to stop, right? But if you can see, oh, look, Bai looks like something that we've already seen. It looks like it has sun in it. Sun, which is this character right here. And once you see another character that you recognize that's a component of something else, you want to take it down, to the next level. But once you start ending up with just things like, single slashes and, at a certain point, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But as long as you see something that's recognizable, and again, unless you give up in despair and never look at Chinese again, if you keep at it, you will start to recognize this, especially some of these simple things, especially a simple character like sun. This you'll see everywhere in Chinese. And the next, the last is the next component of the fourth character in the title is ye, which means page or a sheet of paper, and it's made up of, again, this very simple component, which just means one in Chinese. Actually, because 1, 2, and 3 are just lines like that. If you have a check or a legal document of some sort that says how much land you have or how much money you have, it's very easy to just go in and add extra lines to it. And so in legal documents or financial documents, they have special numbers for 1, 2, and 3 that are much more complicated. But in normal everyday Chinese, 1 is just 1 line, 2 is just 2 lines, 3 is just 3 lines. And then 4, of course, we already looked at before, is already, this 4 is the first character, the Four Great Vows. It's already a little bit more complicated. And so it's not as easy to forge a document if it has 4s in it. So the second character in Ye is Z, which is another character that actually comes up quite a bit in Chinese. And it's one of the names of Avalokiteshvara. When we chant the Heart Sutra, Mahabanya Paramiltashim Kwan Jaje Kwan Ja J. Yeah, it's part of that. It's part of what we say when we say Kwan Jaje. I forget which one it is. We'll get to that. And then this second part is just 2 lines, which is the Chinese character Ba for 8. And so you can see, I'm gonna just briefly make my screen bigger here, so you can see the single line across the top, and then the square with 2 lines in it, and a little thing on top, that's Bai, and then the 2 legs at the bottom, that's Ba, and that's how you make the character Ye. And then of course, the character Z looks similar to Bai. The character for oneself looks very similar to the character for white, just has 1 extra line, but it also looks very similar because it has that little thing on top. And so if you take that thing off, then you end up with the character for I, which is Mu. And all good Zen students know that there's at least one other Chinese character that's also called Mu, but actually in Chinese it's called Wu, and we will get to that. That's actually one of the most it's a very prominent character in the Four Great Vows. Wu or Mu is. So now we've gotten all 20 of the characters. And again, I apologize for maybe going through this really fast, but you'll need to come back to this and review it, and we'll talk about a lot about how to review and how to study this stuff. That'll be a big part of the last session of this class. But now I just want to point out one thing that I mentioned before, that when you combine characters together to make up a new character, the new character takes up the same amount of space as each of the components did by itself. So they get, and this is what this is supposed to illustrate. Oops, where'd it go? You know, when you start, especially during a live presentation, as soon as you start, messing around with things, it'll do things that you don't want it to, which it just did. But let me just make sure I've got the view set properly. Yeah, okay, good. All right. If you were to take these 3 components, right, and now it's changed my cursor to something. Oh yeah, that's right. This is a picture. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm babbling. If you take these 3 components and put them together, they would make something bigger than this, right? And so when you're putting things side by side or on top of each other, or putting one character inside of another, the components get a little distorted from the shape that they have as standalone characters. And that's all really that's being talked about in this slide here. So now we have all 20 characters. The one character that I put an asterisk next to up here. So this is the non-radical form for this character. So this character right here doesn't actually appear anywhere in the Four Great Vows, but it's good to know because the radical form of that character does appear in the Four Great Vows, and also it's a very simple and very common. It's just a character for hand, and if you use your imagination, you can kind of see how that maybe looks somewhat like a hand. And one of the things that you'll find if you start Googling Chinese characters is you can see how these characters evolved over time. And often they started off as something that looked a lot more like what they represent, and then became more stylized and simplified and abstract. But this diagram here just shows all of the deconstructions that we just did. And then any place where there's a character with an asterisk next to it, it's not included in the homework for this character. So in every case down here, I make a note of it. There's two characters that I thought were just too complicated, had too many strokes. We'll get to those next month. Or if you get ambitious, you can go ahead and do them. But they're included in the homework for next month. They have more strokes than any of the characters we're covering this month. And they're the second two characters in the title. In addition, these other three characters are, you'll see them over and over and over again. There's no reason to make a point of just practicing writing those characters by themselves, because they're so common in Chinese that just by practicing the characters that we are going to be practicing, you'll write them over and over again anyway. So they're pretty much already included in what we're doing. It's just worth mentioning that, like I already pointed out, these are, as far as tricky characters to watch out for. You just have to know from context, and most of the time, these characters are encountered as components of other characters. So one of them is, the smaller one is the mouth, which is ko, and the larger one is wei, which is a circle or a boundary. And so like the wei is kind of an interesting character. The character for country is a boundary with something in it, so and the character for picture, like in the ox herding pictures, the character for picture is like a framed picture, looks like a picture. And so anytime you see a square with something inside of it, that's the character wei, framing something, containing something. The character er and the character ba we encountered as components. They look a lot like each other, and they are often encountered with characters that have little legs. There are often characters that have little legs on them. If the legs are straight, as in the second part of this character here, the legs are straight, then that's a ba. If the legs are curved, then it's probably er. But again, as you learn the characters, you don't necessarily have to think about it, but when you're first trying to learn how to write these characters, you do have to think about it a lot, and you might think, well, which one is that? Wait, what is this? And then, of course, this set of characters are just squares with lines in them, and some of them have little hats on them, and you just learn which is which. And then also, as I pointed out before, the radical for hand is it kind of looks like the character for hand, but you have to remember that it's missing a stroke and part of it is crooked and it's compressed. And just this isn't the end of the class, but one thing I want to emphasize about learning these characters is that the characters that we're covering in this very first class, most of them are characters that a 6-year-old Chinese kid already knows. So the HSK is the standardized test for run by the government of China. It's the standardized test for foreigners who want to learn Chinese and who want to demonstrate their proficiency in Chinese. And the first two levels of the HSK tests go up to about what maybe a 7-year-old would know, in a Chinese 7-year-old would know, and probably not even at, I mean, and certainly not at the level of fluency that a 7-year-old Chinese kid would have. But in terms of knowing the characters and being able to write them, maybe a 7-year-old. And so most of these characters are, if you did want to learn Chinese, this is very useful. And learning how to write the characters is extremely useful. And then another thing that these characters that we're learning are very useful for is if, for example, you ever wanted to learn how to write the Heart Sutra, which is a very popular practice that many Buddhists throughout the world learn how to do. This is all very relevant. So there's 16 of the characters, 16 of the 20 characters that we're covering this first class are part of the HSK, the lowest level HSK curriculum, and 16 of them are part of the Heart Sutra as well. So this is all very useful and practical. Useful and practical to anybody who would ever want to learn how to write the Heart Sutra, or anybody who would ever want to learn a little bit of, this is not a class to teach you Chinese, but I do want it to be useful. And most classes that teach you Chinese don't do it like Chinese that is useful for and relevant to Buddhists. And that's one of my motivations for doing this is so that if you just wanted to learn how to write the Four Great Vows, I think that's very useful in and of itself. But if you are a Buddhist, an English-speaking Buddhist who has an interest in learning Chinese, at least some basic Chinese, this is the kind of Chinese that is more relevant to you than maybe learning how to say, "Hello, my name is," and "What time is it?" and "Good morning," "Good afternoon," which is all good stuff. But notice, so we haven't learned how to say good morning or good afternoon or what time is it or anything like that. So we've got, actually it's 4:15, so it's time for another break. This break will be for 10 minutes. Is that okay? I think it's good to have breaks. I don't want people to feel like we're wasting time. I could hear a little check-in. Is 10 minutes okay? I don't want it to be too long, but I want it to be enough for people to be able to come back and do another 35 minutes at the end where we get into some more, like, what do I do with this material? How do I study it? How do I practice it? Okay, 10 minutes. All right, good. Oh, did you have something, Joe? Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Just do it.
신묘장부대 다라니 나모라다나다라야야 나마카야 바로기제 세바라야 모지사다바야 마하사다바야 마하가로니가야 옴 사바바예 수다라나다라야 다사명 나마카리다바 이마마야 바로기제 세바라다바이라간타 나마카리나야 마발타 이사미살발타 사다남 수바나예 영살바보다남 바바마라미 수다남 다냐타 오마로게야로가 마지로가지가란제헤하레 마하모지사다바 삼나라 삼나라 하리나야 구로구로 갈마사다야 사다야 도로도로 미연제 마하미연제 다라다라 다린나레 세바라 자라자라 마라미 마라 마라 모체예헤헤로게 세바라 라미 사미나사야 나베 사미사미나사야 노하자라미 사미나사야 호로호로 마라 호로하레 바나바나바 사라사라 시리시리 소로소로 모차모차 모다야 모다야 메다리야 니라간자 가라사나사남 바라다나나야 마락사바하시타야 사바하 마하시타야 사바하 시타유예 세바라야 사바하 니라간타야 사바하 바라마모카 싱카모카야 사바하 바나마하타야 사바하 자가라욕타야 사바하 상카선나네 모다나야 사바하 마하라구타다라야 사바하 까마사간타이 사시체다 가린나이나야 사바하 야가라자마니 바사나야 사바하 나모라다나다라야야 나마카야 바로기제 세바라야 사바하.
Okay, so let's just assume for a moment. Reset this. So this is supposed to be a question and answer discussion period at the end, but I want to anticipate a major question that you should have at this point, which is now what? Now what do I do? How might one go about actually studying these 20 characters and trying to actually do this, learning to write these, learning what they mean? Actually, I want to go back. Yeah, So this is a blog that I maintain, mindisbuddha.org. Okay, and it actually has a whole bunch of stuff about Chinese. Actually, I just did a post here about GE. This guy mentioned at the beginning, and there's in that blog post there's links to 2 articles if you're interested in knowing more about GE and his relationship with the Four Great Vows. But as a relatively easy to remember URL, mindisbuddha.org. When you get to it, though, what I'm leading up to now is at the very far right in the top. There's a menu across the top. One goes to a web application that I wrote called Writing the Ox, which is designed to help people to learn English-speaking Buddhists to learn Chinese characters. And once you get to this, there are a number of selections up here for different topics. This is the help, and very unhelpfully, I haven't implemented the help function yet on here. But the second selection up here is somewhat obscurely called Xuanzang. That's actually for if you wanted to start learning all the characters in the Heart Sutra. It's called Xuanzang because it was just Zhi Yi was the guy who wrote down what we now call the Four Great Vows. It was Xuanzang who translated into Chinese what we now call the Heart Sutra. But the very next one, very next selection over at this top menu is the Four Vows. So this is what we've been talking about this whole time. And the text for the selection is over here in this green part on the right. And these letters highlight in blue as you scroll over them. You can see that, right? And so if you click on a letter, then useful information appears. And one of the most useful things, and I said I designed this web application, actually the single most useful and best part of this web application is something I did not design at all. But it's a little subroutine that I've incorporated into the web application that actually shows you how to write the characters. It's down here, the green character. See, if I point to it, you can't see that I'm pointing to it, right? But if I do this down here, this green field where the character for 4 is written a little larger, there's a green button down here that says click here to animate. And so when I click this is how you write a character for 4. And so now this isn't the only place in the world. Actually, if you just go up here and grab copy, you can copy one of these, and then if you open up a web browser and say Google, here's a character, what's the stroke order for that character? You will find dozens of websites that will show you stroke order animations. This is the very first one, and here it is. And it will and it'll keep doing it over and over again. And it'll tell you what the radical is. So the radical for this is this square, this way. It'll tell you how many strokes there are. Down here, it provides the pinyin and the definition of it. So actually, there's once you know that all you need to do is copy and paste one of these characters into Google and just say, hey, Google, tell me. You can say, Google, what's the definition? Google, what's the stroke order? You can get a lot of mileage out of that. And on this, let me just make this a little bigger here, so I can see it again. And one thing you'll notice in this green square here are these lines that are written. And those, if you get some paper, I'm gonna stop sharing for just a moment because I want to show something a little bit bigger. Get some paper like this. This is called, it's called a character practice sheet. And so if you actually want to learn how to write characters, that's what you do. And you get these character practice sheets, and you see they have the lines on them. And so you can try to, I know, are you on your phone, Elizabeth? Yeah, I'm sorry. I know this is probably much, I know Joe was on his phone. You're on your phone, Mark? Really? Okay, well, anyway. If you can see it, so a character practice sheet is just a sheet of paper with a bunch of squares in it, and the squares have these guidelines written in them. And so one thing that people sometimes do is they actually trace, they get tracing paper, and they place it over the character, and they trace it. You can only get so far with that. What you really want to do is get these character practice sheets. You can get whole books of them that are all blank, and get something like, now I'm gonna share the screen again to go back to the web application. Get some animation like this that has the lines drawn in it, and watch it, and then try to reproduce that on a piece of paper, and use the guidelines to make sure that you're kind of drawing the square in the right place and the little lines inside of it in the right place. And so in addition to providing the animation that shows you how the characters are written, this application also shows you. So up here up here in the top blue field is the character, again written smaller, the pinyin or the pronunciation. This information here is a little obscure. It tells you different places where you'll find this character. Any character that says something like 113, what does that mean? It means that if you were to go out and get this book called The First 100 Chinese Characters, it's the 13th one in this book. It's 113. Some characters will say 2 something because there's another book called The Second 100 Chinese Characters. Those are great books for learning to write Chinese characters, because it's basically just a book full of practice sheets. They cost about 10 bucks, and each character has a little definition. And anyway, they're really, really good for practice. And so I put it in here that a lot of these characters are not in the first 100 or the first 200 character Chinese character books by Tuttle. Tuttle has a lot of, Tuttle is a publisher that has all kinds of stuff for people who, for whatever reason, are interested in learning Chinese or Japanese or Korean. But the second location is FGV. What might FGV stand for? Well, FGV stands for the Four Great Vows. So any character that is part of the Four Great Vows is given the location of FGV, and this also happens to be one of the characters that's in the beginning level HSK. So, but really, you can kind of ignore this field. This blue, the top blue field tells you, it repeats the character again, tells you the pinyin, and it gives you the meaning. Then the second, down here where it says components of the character, it tells you just exactly that. It gives you the components. And then it also gives you examples of characters that this character is a component of. So sometimes a character has components, and it can also be a component of other characters. So if you were to click on this, it would show you a new character up here, which is some character pronounced she, which means to rest. But right now, I'm not that interested in that character. I'm interested in the characters that are in Four Great Vows. And so this line down here, the components of the character are useful and important for us. And if you click on each of these, then you get, among other things, a new stroke order animation that appears down here at the bottom in green. And you can click on that, and it will show you how to draw just the way, just the circle. Um, and then another thing happened. When I clicked on that component, other things became highlighted over here in the big green area, because these are also characters that have that component. Anyway, so you can go through these one at a time, and actually each step in the class that I went through, you can reproduce that just clicking through in this web application. You can click on the components, see how they're written, see if those components have components, and also see, so some of these components, like this one for air, if you see in this field here, there are lots of characters that have little curly legs on the bottom of them, basically. And this is just these are only the characters that I've actually entered into the database that this web application uses. There's lots more than this. Anyway, so I will send out a link and some instructions on how to use this web application. For now, I think all you need to know is that if you click on Four Vows, you go over here and start clicking on the characters, you can then see everything that we've been talking about up to this point in this class, including these very helpful stroke order animations of how to actually draw these characters. And then the one thing that can be kind of useful and interesting. So like if you click on the, this is now the third character that I've counted. So one thing is that if you click on one character in the green area over here, I clicked here, and all of these got highlighted because these are the same character. So, which makes sense. The title to the Four Great Vows says Four Great Vows, and each one of the vows says I vow or we vow. That word vow is repeated. So this character is repeated, and this character is repeated in each line on the Four Great Vows. The other character that gets repeated a lot in the Four Great Vows is good old Mu. As we say, the Chinese people say Wu or something like that. But for people in either the Japanese or the Korean Zen traditions, we're used to calling this Mu. And so all the other characters in the Four Great Vows occur one time. But for now, if you want to go through the title, click on these characters, you can see the components, see if the components have subcomponents, see if here's sun. This is the character Re for sun. And down here is just, there's, I don't know how many, probably at least 50 characters that sun is a component of. Okay, so that's one thing that you can do to practice, to study, to learn these characters. I mentioned these books by Tuttle. You can get, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of overlap between the characters that are covered in Tuttle's first 100 and second 100 characters. They're still good to know and to practice, but you can make your own practice sheets. So you can do one of two things. You can go to Amazon, or you could find a Chinese bookstore, and you can purchase books that are just, they're not blank pages, they're pages with little squares in them, squares that are like the square here, but they're blank, and you just write the characters in them. You have something like an animation like this, or an example of the character, and you learn how to draw it one stroke at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4. And on the one hand, it's very simple. On the other hand, it takes a lot of practice, and you're training your eyes and your hands so that you don't have to think about it anymore at a certain point. If you want to write the character for sun, you just know what it is and you can write it down. And if you want to write a character that has sun as a component in it, then when you get to that part of the character, you know how to write it. You just write it. And that just and the only way to really master that is through practice. So let me show you in these selections up here. One is a button that's called resources. And unlike the very unhelpful help button that I haven't really implemented yet, the resources button actually has some useful stuff on it. And one of them, you scroll down to the miscellaneous part of the resources page. How to make your own practice sheets. How to make your own practice sheets. And I've got two websites on here that you can go to. One has pretty good free practice sheets that you can make. The other one has much better practice sheets, but you have to pay them $3 to get it. So the practice sheets that I've been making for myself, I use from this one. It's called Purple Culture. I don't know why they call themselves that. But as you can see, if you look over here, look, Kurt Steinmetz, Pro. You know, if you give them $3, and actually it's $3 a month. And of course, if you pay for a full year, you get a discount. But what I'm doing is I'm making up all the practice sheets that I need, and then I'm going to stop giving them $3 a month instead of just. But I really looked around and tried to find a good place there. If you just Google on Chinese character practice sheets, there's lots of websites that have them. Many of them are in Chinese because Chinese people have to learn how to write these characters too, and they need practice doing it. But that's not always very useful for someone who isn't Chinese. And so there's actually lots of these websites that are in English, but this is the one that I'm using, and I just want to. I am going to try to do a little tutorial of this, but I already have. You can see there's all kinds of settings here, right? I've kind of set this up already. I'm going to take one of the characters. Let's take Mu. You know, one of the ways of working on the koan Mu is visualizing, meditating on the character Mu. And to really be able to visualize it well, you really need to know how to write it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as a way of working on the koan Mu, but I'm just saying, you know, you could try it. In fact, why not try it? Anyway, so here's the character Mu. I'm going to copy that character. I'm going to go back to this Chinese practice sheets thing where I already have all the choices made here. And the reason why I have to pay them $3 a month is because most of these choices don't work properly unless you pay them money. They have like defaults set that don't give you the result that you really want, at least in my opinion. But you just put a character in there and then you click on here. So I pasted the character in here, and I go down, I click on the generate worksheet button, and up pops. Now, in this worksheet has three things in it. In the upper corner here is the character that you're after. And then up here in this part, it's one stroke at a time. One stroke, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 strokes. There are Chinese characters that have a lot more than 12 strokes, but 12 is quite a few, especially when you're first starting out learning how to write Chinese characters. So this shows the order in which they're written. And then the first 9 squares here have, so this is not like, this is not like having tracing paper, but this is, the character is put in nice and light, and you can write over it. So your hand and your eyes get used to what it feels like to write out these strokes, and then after that you're on your own. And of course, in addition to the $3 a month expense, you also have to have a printer in order to be able to do this. So that's another downside. So as an alternative, you can just go and usually they're not expensive. For like $6, you can get like a whole book of these practice sheets that are all blank. And the only disadvantage of those is that you don't have this helpful stuff up here to kind of get you going. But you can look at an animation and you can try to write on the blank practice sheets, or you can make these practice sheets and print them out on your printer, if you have a printer. So now we are very close to the end of our time, and so I really should stop. Everybody who signed up for the class also got a file that allows you to print out and make your own flashcards. I'm going to try to make a little tutorial that will help you to do that. I'm going to stop sharing so that my screen is a little bit bigger now. The end result of those flashcards is little cards like this with useful information on one side and just the character on the other side. This is a character that we haven't covered yet. This is one of the strange characters. I don't want to use that as an example. Here's a good, oh, this is also a strange character. Oh, this is a cool character. This is the character for Tang, as in the Tang Dynasty. If you've ever heard people talk about the golden age of Zen in the Tang Dynasty, this is Tang. And this is the information on the other side of the flashcard. And again, you'll need a printer and you'll need heavy paper. But for people who have registered for the class, who don't have printers, if you ask me really nice, I might be able to provide you with some flashcards. So I'm sorry, we're really running out of time. I want to see if people have questions or comments or want their money back or anything like that at this point. Anyone? Feel free to unmute. We've got about 5 minutes. And I'm not going anywhere, but
Thank you, Kurt, for demystifying how the letters are made or how they came about. Although the overall challenge is significant. At least it's been demystified. So I'm not saying it's not a big challenge, but
right, there's no way to make it easy.
Your explanation's clear. Thank you.
You're welcome. If anybody ever tries to tell you, oh, here's an easy way to learn Chinese characters, don't give them any money. I can't see. How does it look on your phone, Elizabeth? Okay, yeah. And so I actually am intending, I don't know when I'll do it, I'm intending to make a more of a phone app where it just displays one character at a time, and you just kind of, click on the character and then it shows you the animation. But in reality, there's lots of phone apps like that are already out there. The only thing that I could add to it is to have something that is just like, that will say, these are the characters in the Four Great Vows. These are the characters in the Heart Sutra. These are the characters in the Hanzi Writer chant. These are the characters in the Homage to the Three Jewels. And so I do want to do that. That I think that would be useful because you can't get that in any. There are many Chinese related. The Chinese have more phones than anybody in the world, right? I mean, so there are a lot of Chinese language related phone apps. And if there's any Chinese people watching this ever, I apologize for my terrible pronunciation of your beautiful, difficult language. Okay, so we will meet up again in 1 month, and if you do go to the mindisbuddha.org blog, there are several blog posts there that are relevant to the Four Great Vows. Feel free to if you have questions, you could all of you have my email address. But if anybody's watching this video who doesn't have my email address, just go to that blog and leave a question somewhere in a comment. And if anybody's watching this who wants to sign up for the rest of the class, that's also possible through that blog. You can even though you didn't participate in this first class, it should be very doable to watch these videos and practice the homework and then participate in the subsequent classes. Okay. So how should we end? I've got an idea. It's just an idea. Just please consider it. We could recite the Four Vows, and we'll do it in English. Although in the next class we will talk about how to chant the Four Vows in the Korean version of the Korean pronunciation of the Chinese characters. But for now, we'll stick with one of the many translations of the Four Vows, and then with a little thing added at the end, which is just a statement of what's already in the Four Vows, but is a dedication of merit, which is a very traditional part of it's always good to begin by taking refuge, which we did, chanting the homage to the three jewels, and to end with sharing merit and making and stating the Four Great Vows. So that's what we'll do now. I'm gonna put it up on the screen. I'm gonna mute everybody except for myself. Look at that. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. Thanks very much for coming, everyone. You can unmute and say goodbye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for coming.
See you next month.
See you soon.
Bye.